some time now for questions, contributions from the floor. With the agreement of my colleagues, we'll take a group of questions at a time. Could you simply say who you are and then your contribution, please? Could we take the gentleman here?
Hello, my name is Adriano Bossoni. I work for Stratfor. And I have a question. I have actually two questions. The first one is for Mr. Featherstone and Mr. Begg. How realistic is it to expect a comprehensive agreement on services? We've seen lobbying groups in the City of London first pushing for passporting rights. Then, when that didn't work out, equivalence became the magic word that everybody's discussing. So how realistic is it to expect an agreement on services? And the second question is for Mr. Travers. What room does the British Parliament have to influence the negotiation process? We saw that during the vote in the Commons a couple of weeks ago. They tried to get a concession from the government, but they didn't. So what room does the House of Commons have to influence the process?
Thank you very much. Other questions, contributions? Could we take the lady here, please? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allison Esty. I'm a student from the United States. My question is, how serious do you think the risk of contagion to Greece is to leave the EU or leave the Eurozone, and is a precedent set seriously?
So you're essentially saying, how serious is Brexit for Greece?
Yeah, and is there a risk of contagion to Greece that Greece might follow their lead and leave the EU or leave the Eurozone?
Okay, thank you. And there's some, yes. The gentleman, my friend over here. Over there. Yeah. Can we take the gentleman here, please? Haris Economopoulos.
Yes, my name is Haris Economopoulos. I'm a lawyer. And I would like to ask the following questions. Very briefly. The common denominator of both parties before the referendum was the renegotiation within a reformed Europe. Would you consider that there is any room in the negotiations period for this to be brought up in the agenda? A. And B?
Sorry, I didn't actually hear the first question. Could you?
Sure. The common denominator of both supporters of Brexit and remain in Europe and remain was the renegotiation within a reformed Europe. At least this was the starting point of both parties, of both sides. Do you see this discussion being a part, let alone a crucial one, of the negotiations coming up? Is there any room? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then the gentleman here. Oh, sorry, can you just wait for the microphone, please, because it's being recorded.
Yes. I have cooperation with Airlander and Ship Company. And I should like to know, they will have a taxes between UK and European Union?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Yes. I should like to know if there will be a taxes between UK and European Union.
Okay. Tariffs. Yeah, right. Okay. Thank you. And then right at the very back, please, here. We're going to complete this round.
Hi, Konstantinos Kanelopoulos. I have a question about the impact of Brexit and the future of the European integration. When the UK leaves the EU, which will eventually happen, the European Union will lose its largest military power, one of its 2 nuclear weapons states, one of its 2 veto-wielding states in the UN Security Council, its second largest economy, and its only true global financial center. The UK has to lose much more from its self-inflicted shot on the foot. The question is, to what extent do you believe that the election of Donald Trump in the United States and the triggering of Brexit, could that be the perfect storm for the EU to move towards the steps for further integration and become the foreign policy actor that it needs to be in the world and live up to the ambitions it set to itself and the world with a new security strategy?
Okay, thanks. That's a very good round of questions covering many different aspects. Ian, do you want to start with the economic aspects?
I'll try. On a comprehensive agreement in services, we have the advantage that the starting point is that the UK is currently compliant with all the rules, particularly regarding the City of London. They're apprehensive that things might start to diverge. So it's not so much what happens the day after Brexit, where equivalence might well function perfectly well. It's when changes start to occur later. For example, a new MiFID directive or something affecting the insurance industry. These could lead to divergence, and that's what the city fears. It's what the Treasury Committee in the House of Commons, Andrew Tyree, its chair, that's what he fears. So it's, I think, the evolution rather than the immediate impact is what we need to be concerned about. Tariffs, very quickly, if we do not get a trade deal, then tariffs are going to be a consequence because it would revert to World Trade Organization rules, and that implies tariffs. The particular damage that would cause is that so much of both British and continental European economic activity is in supply networks, supply chains, and tariffs would disrupt that quite substantially in a way which neither side wants. And it's one of the reasons that I fear from the economics that we risk a lose-lose outcome with the two sides losing from what goes on. I'll also address, if you're happy, Kevin, the question about whether the reforms that could take place hypothetically in the European Union would pave the way for a British Remain outcome. We saw, or some of us at least have seen the white paper published by the European Commission 2 days ago in which it set out 5 scenarios for the future of Europe. At least 2 of these would have been very welcome in Britain. One is the reversion to just the single market, and the other is the articulation of what we call differentiated integration. Some countries going ahead, some only doing a narrower range of things. The trouble is that by the time the rest of the European Union gets round to agreeing any of this, we'll be out. And I do not see a scenario under which the out pathway will be stopped in time to take account of any possible changes inside the EU. It just moves too slowly.
Tony, do you want to talk about the role of parliaments and British responses?
I mean, initially, the Prime Minister didn't want to have Parliament voting on whether or not she should trigger Article 50, but there was a court case brought by a member of the public which went to the Supreme Court, which eventually required the government to do that. Personally, paradoxically, I think that's the parliamentary process will have strengthened her hand, sort of ironically. Theresa May has said that there will not be intermediate parliamentary stages, but there will be some kind of a vote, the ambassador will correct me if I've got this wrong, at the end of the process. Now, you can read that as a concession, if you want to, or as it'll be a take-it-or-leave-it offer. I mean, both those points have been made. Quite how you could reject several years of negotiation, or 2 years of negotiation, or plus, I'm not sure. So that's where we've got to. But I'll just add one point. I mean, although we had a formal referendum, and I share some misgivings about referendums in representative democracies, to be honest, but it happened, and it's happened before. The truth is that a country like Britain, like Greece, is a permanent running referendum, really. The assent of the people, consent to be governed, is a matter day in and day out. And if things didn't start to look so good, the public's opinion would change, and MPs would react to that. So Parliament is never, I mean, you know, you can read the referendum vote as all about restoring sovereignty to the Westminster Parliament. And that Parliament is still powerful, and if it felt that public opinion had re-empowered it to take a different view about all of this, I'm not saying to reject Brexit, but to make the government change its policy about the conditions and terms and conditions, it could do that. Public opinion is essential in all of this as we go forward.
George, do you want to take up the point about Brexit and Greece and Europe?
2 questions. The first regarding the implications of Brexit for Greece on the short run. Directly after Brexit, the spreads on Greek bonds rose. There is a natural response, there was a natural response, a sort of flight to safety, nervousness about the most fragile parts of the Eurozone periphery. Greece is clearly the most salient among them. There was also a combined impact with bad news coming from Italy regarding its banks. Will that have a longer term effect with regard to Greece? I would limit the main longer-term effect in introducing a kind of disintegration and exit precedent, and also the weakening of European institutions and the whole project itself, from which the Greece, as much as other peripheral countries, draw. I would not say that there are many people in Greece who would tend to identify Greece with the UK, and therefore draw a parallel between, say, a supposedly successful Brexit and a potentially also successful Grexit. There's been a very strong majority in Greek society, which is quite remarkable if one considers the 8 years of Great Depression, in support of the euro, mainly as a result of fear of the alternative of exiting the euro. This has ranged between 70 and 60%. It is growing thinner as the crisis moves on, and there's no way to predict or to forecast that this will remain to be the case 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years down the road, but we still have a very solid pro-euro majority in public opinion, and we have a certainly very solid pro-euro parliament majority and the mainstream political system. Now, with regard to the other question of whether this creates a kind of an opportunity, and the Trump administration in the US creates an opportunity for a move towards further integration on foreign policy, I don't believe that there is a kind of an institutional obstacle towards integrating foreign policy further. And certainly at least three of the scenarios that have Ian also mentioned under the white paper offered the opportunity to integrate foreign policy, and it is certainly the case that foreign policy is an area where the EU can be much stronger if it's able to pull powers together. The problem is that we have what technically, sort of in jargon terms, it would be called heterogeneity of preferences, meaning that the idea of the preferences on foreign policy that different member states in the EU have are not compatible over what to do with Russia, with the US, with the Middle East, and so forth. And this comes on the way of having a really integrated common foreign and security policy. Now, the specter of President Trump challenging the EU and NATO contribution of member states could have a short-term impact of uniting the member states, but I would not invest on that. I believe this is just the short-term impact. On the longer run, a strategy of playing members against each other, and a strategy of leading the global order from a rule-based international order to a deals-based international order, whereby the president calls leaders and makes individual bilateral deals that might be disrupting pre-existing rules and global deals, is a very bad precedent, and I think it will be disruptive also for integration of the European Union and foreign policy.
Thanks. Perhaps I could simply add a couple of points in terms of the impact on the rest of the European Union and the potential cohesiveness. I think there are two major challenges. One is the medium-term challenge of the European Union handling the complexity of a new architecture going forward. It isn't simply Brexit and the negotiations, but it's handling the system that survives in the European Union. George, I think, quite rightly referred to the Juncker speech this week as being less than enthusiastic or less than encouraging. The other point we need to add here, I think, is in terms of the resources and the weight, as it were, behind European foreign policy. Clearly, without the UK, the European Union loses one of its seats on the UN Security Council. The UK has a large, effective military. The UK leads a European voice in terms of an assertiveness for foreign policy matters and engagement with the rest of the world. It doesn't strike me that without the UK's resources and without the UK's path of asserting foreign policy interests and intervention, it doesn't strike me that what is left is a European Union which can be particularly strong on the world stage. If we hear from some of the smaller member states support for a more integrated foreign policy, it doesn't suggest that it answers the question that Stalin asked of the Pope, how many troops does the European Union have? Clearly, the military capability would be significantly reduced. Can I just take the opportunity of adding to the comments about referenda and a populist turn? It really did strike me in the context of the UK referendum last year, some of a similarity of narrative with a referendum here in 2015 in Greece, an appeal to say that you know that in your heart of hearts that we can get a better deal, that the European Union will back down, Germany will back down because it needs to sell cars to the UK. This insistence that somehow, and the average person, common sense tells us that a better deal is available, was then represented, of course, by the comment that the British people had, quote, had enough of experts. Don't bother with experts, as it were, which is the point that Tony was referring to. So there are parallels, I think, in terms of Greece on that matter. We have, I can see, just a few minutes for any last questions or contributions. And could we take the gentleman over here, please? Thank you. Yeah, the gentleman here. Thank you.
Hi, it's Marcus Bensassen from Bloomberg. I'm curious about a speculative scenario here. I mean, Mr. Travers in particular, I think you were very pessimistic about any prospect of the decision being, reversed. But let's just say hypothetically, for the sake of argument, that it was. I mean, the mechanism doesn't matter, but say, for example, Jeremy Corbyn is challenged from the left of his party, somebody like Clive Lewis comes in, all of a sudden you have a united opposition on a pro-Europe platform that can get 48% of the vote. Well, that's a willing coalition there. But the hypothetical scenario here is, okay, Britain comes back tail between its legs. What changes going forward? I mean, this isn't a problem now. I mean, it's been decades that Britain's relationship with Europe has been problematic.
Okay, many thanks. And could we take the lady at the front here, please? And then we come back here.
Nikki Javela, former member of the European Parliament. A part of what we call Brussels system wasn't taken seriously, the Brexit, until we had the US elections and Donald Trump was elected. They consider it as an encouraging factor for Britain to proceed with the Brexit. Do you share this opinion? And what Brussels see, from what I know, is that the leading sectors of the US and Britain alliance will be trade, security, defense, and energy.
And?
Energy, especially shale gas and, environmental and energy issues. These three sectors, thank you.
Thank you. And then the final question here at the very front.
Magda Shaheen from American University in Cairo. I would be interested to hear about whether you have given any thought to the Mediterranean countries, to the neighborhood policy. I mean, will you wait until you finish with your negotiations with the EU and then turn to the Mediterranean countries? Will there be single agreements, or will you continue these agreements which we have negotiated with the EU, or will you cancel them altogether?
Thank you. I thought for a moment you were suggesting the future of the UK was to be with Azerbaijan. But I take the point that clearly trade negotiations with those countries outside the European Union could only start formally after we've negotiated Brexit. We have 2 minutes, 30 seconds to Tony, quick.
Good point from Bloomberg over there. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. It's possible, of course, as I tried to imply, that things that look certain now won't be certain because of mood changes within the UK electorate at some point. I absolutely accept that. But for the time being, until and unless a majority were to emerge powerfully to signal to parliamentarians and Parliament were to act against what the referendum suggested, we're stuck on the path we're on.
Okay, thanks. George, Ian.
One word on the connection with Trump, which is one of the great friends of Trump in the UK system is Nigel Farage. You may have heard of this Nigel Farage. If you put their two names together, take the first syllable of Farage and the second and the end of Trump, you get Farump. I think we're in danger of seeing the emergence of Farumpism as the new approach to policy making. Now, Trump has promised Theresa May a quick trade deal. I think she should be very, very cautious, because a trade deal is not the same as a good trade deal.